All right. We're a few minutes after 10 o'clock, so I think we can get started, and I'm sure some more folks will join us. Just want to say welcome. For anyone that wants to use closed captioning, we encourage you to do that. We have that available, and we will put that in the chat as well. My name is Adam Pearl. I'm president and CEO of ArtPride New Jersey. I am a white cisgender male in my early 40s with short brown hair, and today I'm wearing a blue shirt with some leaves on it, and I have a beige wall with a big photo behind me. So I just want to welcome everyone to our webinar. It's been a little bit since we've had an ArtPride webinar, so we're so glad to have you back. For those of you that are joining us for the first time in a long time, or maybe for the first time, we encourage you to pay attention to the chat at the bottom of the screen. We may put some links in there throughout the experience today. We also want to make sure that you utilize the Q&A feature, particularly for our guests, and we will be monitoring that and sharing those questions with our guests today. Also, we want to remind everyone that we are recording this seminar, this webinar. So if something comes quick and you missed it, no worries. You can always go back and find it on the ArtPride website, usually later today, but certainly within a business day. If you have something that you want to share with another colleague or friend, you can absolutely share that recording when it's up on the website. So that is my welcome, and I am going to bring on Anne-Marie Miller, our Director of Advocacy and Public Policy, who's up next for our webinar. Welcome, Anne-Marie.
Hi, Adam. Welcome, everybody. I'm not going to use the camera. We're just going to go through the slides from the beginning. Just to let you know, I am working from my home office studio in mythical central New Jersey on unceded land of the Nanticoke Lenni Lenape Nation. Jim, first slide, please. So before we get into our discussion, just some updates about what's going on in case you haven't been following the news real closely. There are, I think, 12 legislative days left in Washington, D.C. with a lot of issues on the plate of our of Congress. First is the fiscal year 2020 appropriations. As you may know, a continuing resolution bumped the end of the fiscal year to February 18th, and the considerations for the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities at the House level is what we prefer as advocates at $201 million. The Senate level is at $182 million, but as is noted on the screen, there's still time to advocate for that level to increase because the Senate bill is still in draft form. So please contact your senators with regard to the NEA and NEH, and you can find that specific email at artsactionfund.org. There is also a new bill that's an extension of the Save Our Stages Shuttered Venues Operator Grant, an extension because of the amount of funding that has gone out slowly through this bill that would extend the project period for the grantees to use their funds to pay for expenditures now extended through from March 2020 through March 11, 2023. So a companion bill is in the House of Representatives as well. And there's the artsactionfund.org for that bill as well. Next slide, please. So reconciliation, otherwise known as the Build Back Better bill, is hoping to get passed by Christmas, mostly because the child care tax credits end at the end of this calendar year. Whether that's actually going to happen is anybody's guess right now. We know that there are 2 senators who are stuck on this bill, to say it mildly. What is also interesting is that this is the first year in a decade for congressional earmarks. And that is federal funding proposed by members of Congress, that this is outside of the NEA and the NEH. In the House of Representatives, I was only able to find one arts-related bill looking at all of the requests of the New Jersey delegation, and the total requests are $200 million by all of Congress in the House, on the House side. Only one arts-related earmark is by Representative Bonnie Watson Coleman to help support artworks in Trenton. Now, this process for earmarks is going to continue. So if you have especially capital needs that you need addressed, and it's important to start having those discussions with your member of Congress. Next slide, please. So in Trenton, another $700 million was allocated from the American Rescue Plan funds. You see the breakout there. Half of New Jersey's $6.2 billion has now been allocated. That $700 million was funding recommended by the administration to the Joint Budget Oversight Committee, which is the leadership of New Jersey Senate and Assembly, and that passed, I think, about a week ago. Other things that are happening, and we'll talk a little bit more about American Rescue Plan moving forward, but lame duck session is also happening right now. A couple of bills that actually relate to our interests include A5689, which is $25 million for the state tourism promotion. That also includes $5 million for destination marketing organizations, and S844, which would amend the New Jersey Charitable Registration and Investigation Act by revising the threshold of gross revenue amounts received by charitable organizations that determine their annual financial reporting requirements. And the thresholds being is currently $250,000 being raised to $500,000 for the requirements to happen. It also allows you to exempt in-kind donations that relate to the mission of your organization. Next slide. This is where I'm going to invite Vince Hall from the ArtPride staff to please introduce some of this information.
Good morning. So ArtPride is seeking interested parties to join our independent advisory committee, a group tasked with elevating historically excluded artists and arts organizations, along with voices of ArtPride members, stakeholders, and individuals. We're seeking individuals historically excluded and oppressed, specifically those who self-identify as Black, Latinx, Asian Pacific Islanders, Indigenous, or a person of color, LGBTQ, or a person with a disability. So please consider joining the Independent Advisory Committee or share this with someone you think may be interested in a new opportunity.
Next slide.
So some of the key goals will be helping members build better relationships with ArtPride, advocating for members' needs and the needs of the New Jersey arts community, providing accountability for staff on our board on organizational goals, and developing a pipeline for future ArtPride board and staff, as well as the New Jersey arts field. All members of the Independent Advisory Committee will be compensated with a $250 stipend annually and receive additional personal and professional benefits developed through the discussion of the network and what their needs are. There's a submission form, which I'll drop the link in the chat, and the deadline is January 31st. So like I said, please let anyone know who you think might be interested, and self-nominations are also welcome as well.
So next, Adam, would you talk about the next slide?
Sure. So in addition to the launch of our Independent Advisory Committee, thank you to Vince and the team for getting that off the ground. ArtPride is also seeking suggestions for potential trustees for our board of trustees. And we put some new information on the website. So you can go there, and under our board section, you can see that there's some information there, both about the responsibilities of a trustee, what the nomination process is, how someone becomes a trustee. And we really, really want to encourage our members to put their suggestions there. There's a form that they can fill out. So we are keeping that open. That will be open ongoing. So if it's someone now that you think of, or someone a few months from now, that will be something that we have for the foreseeable future.
And Jim, would you talk about the next slide? This is like a family affair today, staff-wise.
Yes, thanks, Anne Marie. So we have another webinar coming up on December 16th. This is specifically about the Audience Insights Manager tool. And for those who aren't familiar with it, it is a cooperative a cooperative patron database. So participating organizations are able to put their data into a secure system and kind of see how it relates to the data from other organizations that are also using the tool. It also bounces that data back to you because we're able to use other third-party database.
Uh-oh, Jim froze.
Powerful tool. Prior to the start of COVID, there were approximately 2 million unique households in the database with about 40 organizations participating in it. So if you want to learn more about AIM, we certainly encourage you to attend that webinar. It'll be December 16th at 10 a.m. And there's information on the ArtPride website about it. And you can see the link there as well. And I'll also drop that in the chat. The subscription window for 2022 is currently open and will be open through January 21st. So if you're an organization that already uses it, I encourage you to attend because we'll have our friends from TRG Arts in Colorado who administers this for us. They'll be there talking about new feature sets and how this is continuing to grow and evolve. Or if you're just kind of curious about how does this thing actually work or what does this really do, this is a great opportunity to hear firsthand from the real experts in data management from TRG. So thanks.
Okay, next slide. And I forgot to note on there that that webinar is at 10 a.m. on December 16th. Okay, so we go back to capital arts grants are now, guidelines are available through the New Jersey State Council on the Arts. And this is all about helping build operational stability and capacity through construction, repair, or expansion of existing facilities. And then the acquisition, installation, and building service equipment. So guidelines are there. They'll be in the slide deck. The deadline to apply is February 17th. And I know that the State Arts Council has extended office hours for folks who have questions about their eligibility within those guidelines. So please note that. The Dial, next slide, please, is the Dial Internship Program. Is the deadline for that is coming up in January. And we at ArtPride have been really fortunate to have had interns through the Dial Internship Program over the past 2 years. So I really encourage you to apply to be a host to one of the interns. They are amazing. Last year, Malcolm Davis helped us launch a brand new program, our Mayor's Committee for Arts and Culture, and he was stellar. And you can't, it's just like invaluable. Next slide, please. Just a quote here, because I have a couple of other resources. And thanks, Lindsay. Lindsay put the link in there in the chat box for the Capital Arts grants, and I believe for I think that was Capital Arts grants. I'll share with you 2 documents right after this, but I just wanted to highlight this quote. The Arts Commission of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences had done some really extensive research on the impact of COVID on arts education and on creative workers. Next slide, please. These 2 publications are really, really good, and I encourage everybody to access them. And I will make sure, I think the link is there, but they are comprehensive, moving, and they explain policies that need to happen to get our sector back in gear and recover fully. So please take some time to review these. Okay, I think that's the end of our slides for now. So what I'm going to do is invite Allison Larena and Jim Beach. Jim Beach is the Chief of Administrative Services for the City of Trenton. And Allison Larena is ArtPride's board president and also the president and CEO of the Mayo Performing Arts Center in Morristown. And this is, this is called trying to untangle, I think, American Rescue Plan funding. And two things that I've been able to point to when people ask me about this, and they ask on a daily basis, believe it. And doing research, first of all, we learned that Allison was able to obtain some significant funding from the County of Morris, and that Jim is involved as an advisor to the mayor and also on the City of Trenton's American Rescue Plan, which I was able to pull up online and look at and found some really interesting ways where arts and culture are involved. And so this is why I thought this discussion could be really helpful. And Jim, I know when we talked, one of the things that you mentioned was that some of this was, or a lot of it was the mayor's vision for how he sees this funding can be used. So if you could talk a little bit about that, that would be great.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anne Marie, and thank you all for inviting me to join this panel. I'm joining you today from lovely Trenton, and you can't tell from my background, but City Hall is all decked out for the holidays. So we're all in a festive mood, notwithstanding the challenging times we're living in these days. As Anne Marie said, I'm Chief of Administrative Services here in Trenton, and one of my primary roles here is to oversee and ensure that the American Rescue Plan funds that the city has received directly are used in an appropriate fashion. The City of Trenton was fortunate enough to receive a grant of $73 million in total. In May of this past year, we received our first tranche. So we'll round up the numbers, $36.5 million. And at that time, we went out and solicited ideas from people within the city. We formed a committee within the City of Trenton that we meet on a bi-weekly basis and talk about how the money is being used and other ideas for how it should be used. So we came up back in May with a first plan of how to use the monies. And it's an evolving process. It's not something that's static where we now have the plan and it's etched in stone. And most recently, we've been surprised by the fact that we had to replace our police and emergency radio system. So we knew that was coming up. We thought it was going to be 4 million. Well, it turned out to be 10 million. So that was a big chunk of our budget that we had initially thought was going to go to other projects. But that is something that obviously is critical to the safety of our residents in here in the city. So that then was utilized for that. So there's still some money left from the first tranche, but not quite as much as what we thought we were going to have. More to the point of this webinar, as Anne Marie mentioned, the Mayor Reed Gusciora, he is a very strong supporter of the arts and has been even before he took office as mayor when he was an assemblyman here representing his 15th district. So when we were putting together this plan, and it still remains in the planning to support the arts, we built in a number of proposed programs that we're looking at. The one thing though I want to stress is that the American Rescue Plan does not allow per se that it's not an arts program. It's really a program to deal with the impact of COVID. But there are ways to support the arts and deal with COVID simultaneously. So what we are looking at, there are effectively 66 different expenditure categories that the federal government will allow us to use the art money for. And, because Trenton is in what we call a qualified census tract, or, in kind of every layman's parlance, the underserved communities, we have some flexibility in terms of how we use this money. So one of the categories, the major categories that the federal treasury allows us to use is services to disproportionately impacted communities. And within that, there are subcategories: healthy childhood environments, education assistance, social determinants of health. So within those subcategories, we have a lot of flexibility of how we will use that money. Stepping away from the arts for a minute, one of the things we are using it for is to rehabilitate our parks here in the city. And, as Anne Marie and I were talking earlier, not everybody's an athlete. So it's great that we get everybody out there in the fresh air and social distancing, but, not everybody's a jock and not everybody's going to be out there taking advantage of that. So, it's also a mental health issue of dealing with, how are people being enabled to cope with the different effects of COVID and being cooped up in their homes. So some of the programs then that we're looking to utilize the ARP money for are, we're devoting $500,000 to a youth arts program. And that is something that allows not only visual arts, but performing arts, musical arts, and it's to, help bring in some instructions. It's to help, develop the facilities that they need, and also to provide equipment for the youth of our city to, take advantage of this and, deal with the negative impacts that COVID has had on them. Another one, there's some that are very specific. We've rehabilitated our pool, and we want to use the youth of our city to develop a mural around that pool. And the youth of the city will be the ones that will be painting that mural and developing what that's going to look like. As I mentioned, it's not just visual arts; it's also performing arts. So another one, we are planning on awarding a local theater here, $25,000 grant, and they will use that with the children here, 8th grade students, to develop a show that talks about the history of not only their school but of Trenton. And let me see if I'm missing anything.
Well, some of the Jim, you mentioned also upgrades to facilities. And like the Roebling Wireworks, where Artworks does art all night, and the Trenton Circus has also used the Roebling Wireworks, and also some HVAC improvements to historic sites, which might also include some arts facilities. Yes. like Mill Hill Playhouse. So what's really interesting, I think, about I'm just going to give you a little bit of breath room here, is that it's such a really comprehensive plan, but there are all these different avenues that the arts can get into. I think one of the things that you mentioned in our conversation that I think would be helpful to people is that the actual American Rescue Plan itself was intentionally vague to offer flexibility to the towns to use it as best as they can, because every town is different.
Yes.
So and then the other thing is the timeline on this is that obligations need to be made for the funding by 2024, with, I think you said, spending by 2026.
That's correct. Okay. And yeah, I mean, it is something where, and I'm trying to rein the mayor in to some degree, because, you don't want to go out and, spend all your money in one go and then find out 2 years from now that, oh, we have a real problem and we could have used that ARP money for that. Which is why, and things like the police radio system was not originally something that we intended to spend that much money on, but, circumstances dictated that we had to. So to your point then, Anne Marie, it is something where I think, we should take our time, be a little bit, circumspect about how we're using this money. And also, though, making sure we are using it in a proper way and also for the purposes intended. And, when we're talking about the mental health, I think every day we see that, particularly among the youth in our country. And I know here in Trenton, it's not just, the COVID, but it's also the gun violence and the other gang violence that we're dealing with. And so, these programs are things that we're trying to keep the kids off the street and make sure that, they're heading in the right path and in the right direction.
Brett, I noticed that there was funding for Trenton Central High School students to do internships. And among the, sort of the various categories of internships was also included the arts in that as well. So one of the things that I think people ask about all the time is, so this money's going out, whether it's going out to counties or to cities, like, then how will I access it? And I know that you talked when we chatted about the fact that you're in the middle of drafting guidelines and how to apply for funding. If you could talk just a little bit about that, because I think
absolutely
people need to understand that they will, in not all cases, but in many cases, have to apply for that kind of funding.
Right. So far, most of the programs we've done have been, within the walls of City Hall, and that, they're direct expenditures from the city. But, a number of these programs, including some of the ones I've mentioned today, are ones where, the monies will go from the city to the subrecipients. And, I'm sure many of you who are on this webinar, probably more times than I have had to deal with grant writing and, trying to get monies, whether it's from the state or from a county or from the federal government. And, this is no different. And even though a subrecipient gets the money, the city of Trenton is ultimately going to be answerable to the federal government. So, as the administrator of that program, it's incumbent upon the city of Trenton, if we're going to give a grant to a subrecipient, that we have to ensure that they're using it in an appropriate fashion, that they're following all the guidelines, and that we are monitoring how they're using it, because they're not the ones who are going to have to report back to the federal government. It's going to be the city of Trenton who's going to have to report back on a quarterly basis and, demonstrate to the federal government that these monies have been used in an appropriate fashion. So.
That's good. Thank you. I know before we head over to Allison, that one of the points that you made that I think is really interesting, and also Allison could probably talk a little bit about this too, is the fact that everyone, regardless of where they live, also needs to be really cognizant of what's happening with local politics. And you mentioned the fact that in Trenton, it's a tense political situation between council and the mayor, and that this is a time when these kinds of issues are on the table, and arts and culture can sometimes be a little bit of a political football, is to be able to have some real grassroots contact with your city council, to be talking to them about how important the funding is.
Absolutely. So, the way the city government here works in Trenton is that, the administration comes up with the ideas, but before we can spend a penny, we need to go to city council and get their approval. And, as you mentioned, Anne Marie, it is a political football every turn of the coin. And, the city council people, to their, that's why they were put in by their constituents. So they're, like our, House of Representatives or senators down in Washington, they're trying to, filter money back to their constituents. So, they're going to have their pet projects within their wards, and they're going to want to make sure that, if people in the West Ward are seeing people down in the South Ward are getting money, they're going to be like, well, what's happening to us? Why are we the poor stepchildren? So that enters into the equation a lot of times. And, when you run into certain council people, you can see that they have their pet projects. And, that doesn't mean that they're not appropriate projects, but, Unfortunately, it's not a bottomless well. And at some point, we're going to have to make decisions over where the monies are going to be allocated. To your point, and we've encountered this, we saw this when we were going through the legalization of marijuana, that, people were calling in. And we most recently were looking at this in terms of rehabilitating the library. If you're fighting for every penny, you need to come back and go to your local government representatives and, put the pressure on them to go and fight for you. So, within the wards, as we have these different projects coming down, we're going to start advocating to the people on the ground in the neighborhoods. Hey, you need to start pressuring your council people to support these projects, because, they're ultimately the ones holding the purse strings.
Well, I want to salute the mayor for his overall vision for the quality of life in Trenton. He's always been a great advocate for the arts, and we appreciate that when he was in the legislature, and also, what he's trying to do in Trenton is really admirable at the least. And I'll pitch this over to Allison now to talk a little bit about the funding that you are getting from the County of Morris, and a little bit about the advocacy that you did to be able to, get this.
Thank you, Anne Marie, and thanks for asking me to join this panel. And it's my pleasure to talk a little bit about the funding that we received. This funding, we are so appreciative to the county commissioners for awarding the theater $600,000 to restore, relaunch, and expand our education and outreach programs. And it didn't happen overnight, though, like many of us know and talk about. We went many, many years without any funding from our county commissioners, but we always kept in touch with our county commissioners. We always cultivated, hopefully, a contribution from them. We were always hoping to go. We went in front of their meetings all of the time. We've submitted grant applications to the county commissioners, and they had supported us at one time or another throughout the past decade. But they certainly supported us in many other ways other than funding. But in the earlier part of this year, we realized that, there was $95 million coming to our county in ARP funds. And we wanted to really have a serious conversation with the county commissioners at that point, because we know the purpose of the ARP funds, and they're to address, obviously, the economic fallout from the pandemic and to lay the foundation for a strong recovery. And what other great investment would there be but into the arts, so that we could fully reopen and relaunch all of our programs, so that we could continue the economic impact that we had on our region, on our county pre-pandemic. So originally the conversation was a little bit different with our county commissioners, and they actually wanted to do some sort of a county-wide multi-day festival where we brought in entertainers and local merchants and vendors. And at that point, we went back to them and said, look, we're working on with limited resources. We had to furlough more than half of our staff. We had a capacity of 250 at that point, where we just weren't making, we were financially devastated. We had lost over $14 million in earned revenue, and there was no way we could take on some sort of a multi-day festival. So we said, again, please make the investment in the theater so that we can reopen and we can then drive that much needed revenue back into our local economy. So they agreed to a Zoom meeting with us. This was months and months in the works. We originally went in with a proposal for $5 million of the $95 million. We thought, what greater investment again, but to invest in general operating support for the theater, to help us to offset the significant loss that we recognized in earned revenue, to bring back our furloughed employees, to replenish the reserves that we had to deplete to get us through those past few months of the pandemic, and to keep the theater and the performing arts school operational. Our performing arts school costs over $1 million to run, or our education programs do every year. We also had a capital campaign of $20 million that we were just about to launch to expand the theater, to build education studios and a smaller performing arts space. And we needed to relaunch that building expansion project and capital campaign. So after initial conversations, few back and forths, the commissioners stated that their interest was in supporting education programs. This goes to Jim's point of education and the ARP funds. At that point, there were no guidelines for what the ARP funds could be utilized for. So we went back and forth. I agree with Jim wholeheartedly that it's all about documentation. It's all about really accountability. We went back and forth a few times. We have a 21-page contract with the county, and certainly understand, their need to really verify and be accountable for the use of these public funds. So they came back to us and said, we want to support your education programs. We want to help you relaunch them. We know that you serve over 40,000 school children, most from our county each year. And we want that to be something that we support with these funds. It's a great use of these funds. So the period that the grant covers is from March of 2021 through December 2023. Again, it's $600,000 that probably will be expensed this year. And, we just as far as what the accounting looks like, again, I said, what the contract looks like, but we also have to submit a lot of information every month to the county. And, they will then reimburse us or give us an allotment on a monthly basis moving forward. So I think the key factors that I believe, come into play here when we look at these ARP funds and what worked for MPAC, obviously the cultivation to continue that dialogue with our public officials consistently. I know sometimes it doesn't really work with our schedule and we're so busy, working on the day-to-day operations, especially with reduced staff at this point and reduced funds at this point. But I think that's really, really important. I also say communication and having that flexibility of being able to speak with our public officials to see what it is that they might be interested in funding. I think that's a really, really important place to start. And perseverance. I mean, this is a decade in the making, this grant. And then of course that financial accountability. But the county commissioners were also looking for some type of recognition as well. And we, instead of just submitting a press release for this contribution, we had a big event where one of our performing arts school students performed, and it really was a beautiful way to showcase what their funds were being utilized for. But also, and I think this is actually on ArtPride's website as far as the American Rescue Plan, simple steps to include when asking for funding, is to find that champion, right? I mean, public officials, they have different needs at different times and different ways that they want to support organizations at different times. Again, persistence is key, but also finding the champions. We have some really fantastic county commissioners who really helped to shepherd this contribution, and we are sincerely grateful for what they did.
I found it interesting, and I think we have a couple of questions too, but the fact that what Jim presented, and as well as what you presented, is that the term that we all use of general operating support is not totally recognized as something that is easy for them to understand. So drilling it down to the educational programs or all the different programs that Jim mentioned that provide, they are part, all of that is general operating in some way, but making it more specific for them to understand exactly how that money will be used is really key.
Definitely, because our programs are so extensive. I mean, we have 250,000 people walking through our doors every year. They recognize that. They recognize the economic impact of the organization, but really it was, serving the children in our communities and their families that resonated with them.
And what's also really interesting, and I know Adam has a question, is that there's also ESSER money that goes directly to public schools as part of American Rescue Plan, but this is totally different because it's not going to the schools, it's going to the arts organizations.
Yes.
Adam, did you have a question?
We did. We had a question from a participant. It's either from a guest named Thomas Anita, or it's from our board trustee Anita Thomas, and somehow Anita's name got flip-flopped. But either way, Anita's question, I think it's for Jim. And Jim, you might have covered part of this because Anita put this up earlier. So I'll ask this outright and you can answer whatever parts make sense for you. Anita's asking, who was on the committee from the arts community and how did you find them? Anita said it is her. And who's determining how much money goes to the arts? And how are you supporting local artists to sustain themselves in business in the city?
Okay, let me take them in order then. So,
Sure.
well, actually, I'll flip around. So the committee consists of a number of representatives from the mayor's staff. There are 2 members of city council who are on the committee. And then, we invited a number of people that we being both the mayor's office as well as city council, know are community leaders within their respective wards, and they were asked to join this ARP committee. And it's only, to be clear, it's only an advisory committee. It's not a decision-making body. But within that committee, though, there are a number of individuals who have strong ties to the arts community here in the city of Trenton. And I think, certainly the mayor, when he was making his decisions over who to invite to join this, was, that was first and foremost in his mind to, make sure that the arts were represented here in the city on this committee. How were these projects determined? As I said, it's not a static issue here. We'll have to wait and see when we get our second tranche what happens. But these were ones that we developed. A website is called Talk Trenton. So in addition to having the committee, we went out to the city and invited them to give us feedback over how they thought we should use the money. And obviously we got all kinds of different ideas of how we should be using this money. Some, including supporting the arts here, and that's to some degree how we came up with some of these. But members on the committee as well, they're the ones that are in the trenches of the city, and so they recognize where we can get our best bang for our buck out of these different projects, and what's going to give the greatest impact in terms of dealing with the mental health issues that we were talking about, and helping to support the arts community here in Trenton. The last part of the question, so far, we have not done anything where we are supporting individual artists. The same way we have not gone out yet to support individual businesses, and there is a lot of suffering among the small business community here in the city of Trenton. And we're not unique in that fashion. We see it all the time. Restaurants going out of business and small businesses that are shutting their doors just because they weren't able to make it through the last 2 years through the COVID. But there are other programs, whether it's rent assistance or food assistance, that may not be specifically ARP related, but those are programs that certainly members of the arts community can take advantage of as well, and utilize to help weather this storm that we're all going through right now.
So, and also, somebody's going to have to do the youth arts programming, and there'll probably be artists, involved in that. And then somebody's going to have to help guide the mural, which there'll probably be an artist involved there. And then I think there was also, the Passage Theater. So there's going to be some artists involved in putting the story together about Hedgepeth Williams. And then there was also something about photography and video grants to document youth programming. So you're going to have, also be helping artists in that way too. So it's all direct, right? And same thing with Allison. I mean, you have teaching artists who will be involved in providing the programming through your youth outreach as well. So artists will be served that way too.
Definitely.
So I don't know if there's any other questions out there. If not, I want to thank Jim and Allison for your time this morning. I don't know that this entangles it anymore. Untangles it, whatever the right word is. I don't know if it helps. I think just learning about examples will help our field. I know we had a discussion just the other day with Bergen County arts folks, They're looking at 5% of, I think, $260 million that's going to Bergen County. And they all just gathered on the Zoom to talk about how they could perhaps pitch the county executive about that kind of funding. And I think it's really important to find out if there is a planning process, what that planning process might be, but you have to get out there and do the work. That's the bottom line. So thank you both for everything and for your, if we'll actually, if there are any questions following up, we'll get back to you. Thanks for your time this morning. Have a really good holiday. And I don't know, I don't know if we have any other slides there. Adam, any other questions?
I
Anything
don't
else?
think we do have any other slides, but I definitely wanted to come on and wish everyone out there a happy, healthy, and peaceful season and new year. Oh, you thought of something, Anne Marie?
Yeah, one more thing is that we're in the throes of our annual appeal. So I want to make sure that everybody out there is thinking about ArtPride and thinking about these webinars and all the things we do all year. And if you can do anything for our annual appeal, I know you're going to be hearing from us, so please.
And if I could, can I say something? Can I interrupt you for 1 second there, Anne Marie? If it wasn't for, and I'm putting my ArtPride hat on quickly, if it wasn't for the advocacy efforts of ArtPride, I specifically say Anne Marie, Adam, Sharon, Vince, Jim on the phone, and the support we receive from the State Arts Council and the federal funds, our chapter right now for an organization would be written completely differently. It would just be a whole different dialogue right now. So really advocacy is so important, and supporting as is so important as well, because they do extraordinary work.
Well, I know that Megan and Corey are doing backflips as participants. So artpridenj.org/give. Megan just put it in the link, and I'll copy it too. If you can support us, we're going to keep doing what we do for everyone out there. And like I said, we just wish everyone health and happiness and peace. And thank you, Anne Marie, Allison, Jim, the whole team for getting it done, because ArtPride is everybody. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Have a happy holiday all.
You too, Jim.
Take care, everyone.